Hi guys, it's Paul. I'm back. So one of the things I realized I haven't really talked about on the channel at all, and one of my reading passions is actually nonfiction. It didn't seem to fit into what I was doing in the channel, so I didn't talk about it. But I thought let's get back into the swing of making some videos and talk about my love of nonfiction. And also, I said I have like 5 rooms. My library spreads to it's actually 5 rooms: a foyer, a closet, and an attic. But I have a room for historical fiction and a room for nonfiction. And my son was living in the room for nonfiction, and I went in to clean up some of the mess he left me, and I was cleaning some of the books and brought them downstairs. Which reminded me, I have a pile of books here that I've hauled that are nonfiction that I haven't shown. And I thought maybe I'd talk about some of my nonfiction passions and loves and things like that. I thought maybe it might be interesting to see a different side of me than what I've done on other videos. If you're interested, but yeah. So that's what we're gonna do today. Nonfiction. Hope I just didn't turn everybody off. So obviously, anybody who's seen this channel knows I love animals, and I have a bunch of animal nonfiction, mostly dogs and wolves, but not just that. I have a passion for. I love octopi. I'm a big fan of octopi and other animals in general, bears, whatever. But I picked up the Orca book, and there's actually a purpose behind this one because there's a project I'm thinking about doing that I'm working on for way later in the year, and you might be able to figure out what it is. But yeah, so I picked up the Orca book. Like I said, plenty of animal books. I have a whole lot of nonfiction books on animals, especially dogs. So I also picked up this beautiful Princeton Press book on Tyrannosaurus Rex. Beautiful, beautiful piece. Couldn't ever afforded it if it didn't go on sale. So it's a lot of art and stuff. So not quite animals, but similar idea. But I'm a huge history buff, so I have a lot of books on different parts of history. My favorite parts of history lean towards ancient history up before pre-Renaissance era. Then you could whittle that down to the creation of the Britain as we know it, as the different factions fought for it, and specifically, I love the interaction after the Viking invasion, and the battle for England between the Vikings and the Anglos and Saxons, and whatever that story. It's one of those ones I love. I'm a huge fan of. But heritage can play a big part into our interest in nonfiction. I am, not that anybody cares, I'm half German, 25% Irish, and 25% Macedonian. Part of my family comes from a city called Bitola in Macedonia. And so I've always been fascinated with Alexander the Great. So yeah, I do have books on Alexander the Great that I read. I enjoy his stories. So I might just be because he's Macedonian too, and sometimes you enjoy fiction, nonfiction about your history, your family, your heritage. But yeah, there's a lot. Don't have a lot of books on Germany that don't involve world wars. Unfortunately, my family came from Germany and settled in his Pennsylvania Dutch before moving to New York. But there isn't a lot of books on Germany that don't touch on bad stuff. So I do have a lot of that though. Um, Scarface and the Untouchable. Another part of history I love is the outlaw and law enforcement culture from the end of the Civil War up through the 30s. And I believe you can make a direct line from the outlaws like Jesse James and the Daltons through Bonnie and Clyde and John Dillinger and Scarface, Al Capone, just like the law enforcement. I think you can follow Wyatt Earp and Pat Garrett right through Elliot Ness, I think there's a direct line. I'd love to see somebody do some research, do a bit on that, a piece on that. I'd love to read that because I do believe that there is a direct connection, that that unbroken line from one set of outlaws to the Old West into the historical, into the gangster era of the 1920s and 1930s. I don't think the outlaw went away. They just evolved into something else. And so, yeah, I do love that section of history and that idea, that storyline. So, speaking of World War II, I got Skies of Thunder by Caroline Alexander. It talks about the China-Burma air campaign, which doesn't get a lot of conversation about it, but I was able to pick it up pretty cheap, and it sounded interesting, so I got that. And staying in World War II, The Mighty Moo. It's a story of the USS Cowpens. So, again, it went on sale. Thought I'd pick it up. Sounded pretty interesting. So this is stuff I picked up recently, and I haven't had a chance to show or don't show during my normal book hauls. I did actually start Klein's 1177 BC, the year civilization collapsed. I just started reading that. And then picked up his follow-up. They put his hardcover on sale for the after 1177 BC. So I grabbed that as well. Let's see what else I got in here that I picked up recently. The Anglo-Saxons by Mark Morris. It's a history of the beginnings of England from 400 to 1066. There's a amazing storyline that follows around 1066 that is, if you're interested in history, you should check out. I have a bunch of books by Dan Jones. This is just one of them that I picked up recently, The Plantagenets, which follows the warrior kings and queens who made England what it is. And like I said, I like the story of England pre-Renaissance and how England, UK was built up and created. I think that's really fascinating. I have to pause and let the dogs out. Sorry about that. Nature calls. So I picked up Ron Chernow's Grant. This book is enormous. I was actually looking for the Sherman book, which I may have mentioned in another video earlier in the week, but there's an annotated version of his memoirs coming out later in the year, so I'm going to wait and pick up that version. But this book is huge. It's a General Grant, Civil War hero, but anyway. The Peloponnesian War. Definitely have an interest in that era. So this is Donald Kagan's Peloponnesian War. This is the Penguin Classic version. So and they, of course, sent it to me damaged, because why not? And another book on the Peloponnesian War, A War Like No Other, by Victor Davis Hanson. So yeah, we're getting some Peloponnesian on coming up. Then I have a bunch of bag of stuff that I brought down to clean up, and it's definitely not all my stuff, but it just happens to be what I have sitting here, so I thought I'd show you. I have a whole bookcase of nonfiction. A lot of it's World War II. Most of it's World War II or Old West stuff, so that's all upstairs. I'm not pulling it all out, but I thought I'd show you what I just happen to have down here since we're talking about nonfiction. Frederick Kemp's Berlin, 1961. This is Cold War stuff. I don't usually have an interest in Cold War, nonfiction, but this one sounded fascinating, and it reminded me of a book I have on Casablanca and the intrigue that was going on during World War II there. So I thought, that's actually sounded like an interesting subject. Okay, the Operation Sea Lion. Like I said, I have a lot of World War II books. This one kind of got damaged. This is one of the ones I was talking about that my family was so kind enough to damage for me while they used my space. This is the Failed Nazi Invasion Operation Sea Lion. So this is by Leo McKinstry. Killer Angels by Michael Shara. This is probably one of the most famous nonfiction books ever written. It actually is part of what inspired Joss Whedon to write Firefly, actually, believe it or not. Yep, it actually is. So, and this is widely praised as one of the greatest nonfiction books ever written. If you wanted to try and get into it, especially about the Civil War, this would be a great entry point. Beautifully written. Even if you're not a fan of nonfiction, this reads like a fictional account. It reads like something Cornwell or Eagledon would have wrote. So yeah, check it out. Again, I'll get to let the dogs back in. Never ends. Be right back. Okay, let's finish up. So let's see. I got a Monster: The Rise and Fall of America's Most Corrupt Police Squad. It's it sounded interesting to me, so I thought I'd grab it. This is by Baynard Woods and Brandon Soderbergh. This is a story of one of the most corrupt police forces in American history, the Baltimore Police Force under the Gun Trace Task Force. In 2017, they broke that up and arrested a bunch of people. So yeah, I thought it was just an interesting subject, and like I said, I like some things on crime and stuff. So every once in a while, I will pick something like that up. Black Horse Riders. This is a Vietnam era book, another era that I like to read in. I was born during the Vietnam War, and it holds some intrigue for me, as I know I have a lot of friends who actually fought during the war. So this is by Philip Keith, and it talks about the 11th Armored Cavalry. Nicholas Irving with Gary Brozek. This is The Reaper. It's about snipers, military snipers. I remember I picked it up really cheap and it sounded interesting, so I grabbed it. Betrayal in Berlin. Again, like I said, I don't usually read a lot of Cold War stuff. It's not an era that I really enjoy reading about, but the idea of what was happening in Berlin at the time sounded interesting. So I did pick this up. Steve Vogel's True Story of the Cold War's Most Audacious Espionage Operation. Hugh L. Mills Jr., Low Level Hell. This definitely is something that interests me. As I've mentioned many times on the channel, I love helicopters, and the helicopter events in Vietnam are of great interest to me. So it's not, the era itself isn't a time that I enjoy in American history. The events that happened during the war I find to be rather intriguing, and I love helicopters, so I love to hear about the helicopter stories and the helicopter end of the war. So another thing I do love to read about is, I don't know why, but this fascination with Canadian troops during World War II, or the ski troops during World War II as well. But yeah, O'Keefe's One Day in August this is actually a very tragic story about Canadian troops that were killed in 1942 when they stormed the French port at Dieppe. So I've been actually putting this off because it is rather sad and depressing, and while I would love to know the story, I don't always want to be depressed. This one sounded interesting to me, so I picked it up. Josh Dean's The Taking of K-129. How the CIA used Howard Hughes to steal a Russian sub in the most daring covert operation in history. I mean, I just was intrigued by what that was. I don't know that story, so I picked it up because it sounded fascinating. This is easy to find. It's everywhere, actually. Unsinkable by James Sullivan. 5 Men in the Indomitable Run of the USS Plunkett. It's about a specific warship during World War II. And also in here, like I said, I have a lot more upstairs. It just happened. These are what I have down here, whether I picked them up recently or I was cleaning up the room and what I was, the books I had cleaned. The Dalton Gang. I've already read a whole book on the Dalton Gang similar to this, so I don't know if I'm going to read this one anytime soon, or unless this was the one, and I'm getting confused because they kind of run together sometimes. But Tom Clavin's The Last Outlaws, The Desperate Final Days of the Dalton Gang. Old West story about the infamous Dalton Gang and how their time ended. So I I'm doing this little cut in because, as usual, I forget to ever mention like ebooks or audiobooks I pick up, and Audible is running their 2-for-1 sale right now. I had a bunch of credits, so I thought I'd grab a few things, and some of them actually qualified for this video. So I thought I'd cut back in and mention what I picked up that would qualify to be talked about in this video. I picked up Clarence Darrow, Attorney for the Damned by John A. Farrell. It's actually was free, so I didn't get charged anything for that. If you have a membership, you can add that to your library for free. Talks about, obviously, Clarence Darrow, famous lawyer. You may have heard of him, but I wanted to hear, learn a little bit more, so I added that to my list. And I picked up separately from the 2-for-1 sale, Midnight on the Potomac, The Last Year of the Civil War, The Lincoln Assassination, and the Rebirth of America by Scott Ellsworth. That one just fascinated me. The concept I thought of would be interesting, so I used the whole credit on that one alone and loaded it up to listen to, now. Strike of the Sailfish, Two Sister Submarines, and the Sinking of a Japanese Aircraft Carrier by Stephen L. Moore. World War II book about the sinking of an Japanese aircraft carrier. Sounded interesting. That's one of the things I picked up. Here's another one that I actually paid for versus using credit because it was $3. And Scipio Africanus, Greater Than Napoleon. He was a famous general during the Roman times. And he's come up in a lot of my board games and stuff, historical war games. And I didn't know a lot about him personally. I just know he sounded interesting. So I thought, for $3, I'd pick it up. Check it out. So Last Mission to Tokyo, The Extraordinary Story of the Doolittle Raiders and Their Final Fight for Justice. That's the story of the Doolittle Raiders, the attack after Pearl Harbor, where we were getting revenge and flew a bunch of bombers into Tokyo to bomb it. If you saw the movie Pearl Harbor, at the end of that movie, they kind of ran the Doolittle raid, but didn't give you a lot of detail. So obviously, this will give you a lot more detail. And I thought I'd check it out. Lincoln Spies: Their Secret War to Save a Nation. It really sounded fascinating. During the Civil War, Lincoln had a few men and a woman who would go into southern camps and stuff and gather information and send it back to him, be spies, and actually caught my attention and thought I'd check it out. And The Storm on Our Shores, One Island, Two Soldiers, and the Forgotten Battle of World War II. This is actually a fascinating story, and it doesn't get a lot of attention at all. It's the only battle ever fought on American territory in World War II. It's an island way off in the Pacific, actually off the coast of Alaska, where we battled the Japanese for possession of this island. And funny enough, right after I bought this book yesterday, I turned on YouTube and was watching a video on Historicon, a gaming convention that just ended, and somebody was running a game that relived the battle, replayed the battle of this event, of this book. And it's funny because you never hear about it, and then I bought the book and went and watched the video minutes later, and this was actually one of the games that they were doing, so it was just kind of neat. But anyway, yeah, so it's an interesting battle, interesting story, because like I said, it's the only battle ever fought during World War II on American territory. And I don't think the Japanese were prepared for the cold weather they encountered on this island. It used to be Russian territory at one point. There's even a Russian church that plays into the part of the battle. But anyway, I just wanted to do this cut in and tell you about a few more things I picked up during the 2-for-1 Audible sale, because they qualified for this video. Anyway, back to their regularly scheduled program. So one of the other subjects I enjoy, and I'm looking for recommendations on the books, is I'm looking for books about the Servile Wars. And everybody knows the Third Servile War, Spartacus and that story. But that was actually the third of them. And I'm interested in the whole history of the Servile Wars and, all three events. If anyone has any recommendations for those, let me know. I'd appreciate it. So anyway, yeah, I just thought I'd show some of the nonfiction stuff I had. It's something a little different. Trying to get back into the swing of filming, as I said. So anyway, I hope you got something out of that. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope it's, you have some interest in. You weren't bored. If you were, you probably clicked away. And anyway, thank you. Please subscribe, and I hope to talk to you again soon. Have a good one.